Okay, I'd like to welcome you all here this afternoon. I'm happy to see such a nice crowd. And this afternoon we're going to talk about a Victorian Christmas. During the Victorian era, all things English and European were studied in the Americans to determine what type of what value they had and what customs that they would like to use here in the United States. Americans from the Adirondacks to the Ozarks, from the Smokies past the Rockies, chose to especially emphasize the rituals of the exchange of gifts, the Christmas tree, and the Christmas feast. The Victorians were not one to leave a garment, a room, or food unadorned. Ruffles, lace, and jewelry enhanced clothing. Paintings, gilding, draperies, swags, ornate furniture, and busy wallpaper characterized interior decor. Sauces, garnishes, condiments, and tidbits embellished the affluent Victorian menu. Their preference for a profusion of various dishes at a meal created a multi-course visual and gustatory extravaganza. A Victorian Christmas Day dinner was usually preceded by glasses of champagne, punch, or wine. These beverages might be served throughout the meal. Afterwards, some punch, hot toddies, wassail, cordials, mulled wine, or eggnog often graced the diners' palates. The Victorians laid a beautiful table whenever possible. They used a crochet or lace tablecloth, their own silver, the finest silver and crystal they had, and eye-appealing foods. Farther west, as one traveled from the eastern seaboard, Christmas customs were out of necessity, not as elaborate as they were on the East Coast. In the late 19th century, English, French, German, and Swedish and other ethnic groups were still pushing westward to unsettled or remote regions. These groups of people could not always celebrate Christmas in a material fashion as did their Eastern counterparts. But whenever or wherever possible, they did commemorate Christmas in some external manner. A mother might serve homemade berry wine instead of champagne. Goose, venison, and antelope could replace the dinner entree, and biscuits take the place of dressing. Other Christmas foods could be wild pig, opossum, bear, rabbit, raccoon, buffalo meat, ducks, prairie dogs, and prairie chickens. The meal was an important part of the Victorian Christmas celebration and could contain 18 to 20 courses, although 10 was but more of an accepted number. There was always plum pudding. One writer said that Christmas without plum pudding was like Shakespearean's Hamlet without Hamlet. For centuries, this Christmas pudding has contained raisins and currants, but no plums. The Victorian Christmas also included the playing of games and lots of dancing. Although Prince Albert is given credit for introducing the Christmas tree to England in 1841, there are records of decorated trees before that. There is a historical record of a tree in the Queen's Lodge at Windsor in 1800. And in 1832, 13-year-old Victoria described in her diary decorated trees in the Dragon Room at Brighton Pavilion. Queen Adelaide was her aunt. So Prince Albert is given credit for making the Christmas tree an important part of the holiday celebration. On that Christmas tree, he gave his wife the gift of a tree. It was decorated lavishly with jewels, candies, fruits, gingerbreads, and sweetmeats. Americans enthusiastically adopted and embraced the romanticism of the Victorian Christmas, eagerly copying the customs from overseas. Victorian Christmas trees were decorated with long wax tapers, crocheted ornaments, gilded egg cups, baskets of sugar plums, candy-filled paper cornucopias, smartly dressed dolls and toys, gingerbread cookies in various shapes, and delicate glass ornaments. Tin, tinsel, cardboard, and wax were cleverly crafted into decorations. Less prosperous for those living in the west, west of the major metropolitan areas, they might use materials gathered in the fields and the woods, such as nuts, dried flowers, herbs, apples, and berries. Sometimes there were wood carvings and whimsies of ribbon and paper or yarn. Cookies and family possessions such as jewelry, silverware, and porcelain knickknacks were also used on the trees. Even small stuffed animals like squirrels and chipmunks. By the mid-1800s, the Victorian Christmas tree had grown from a tabletop model to a room-height masterpiece. Usually the tree was decorated by the parents, and at a certain time the children were led into the room. The first glass ornaments were icicles and kugels. And a kugel is a heavy glass ball that was made in Germany. And I have one here. Now, when these first Christmas ornaments came out, they were very heavy. This is a very heavy glass ball, and it has a brass indent on the end, much as you would use in the end of a brass curtain rod. It's set in there with a cork. Now, most of these were blown quite large, and instead of hanging them on the tree, they hung them from the ceiling around the room. But they made some small ones this size to hang on trees. Now, my first experience when I had two of these 10 years ago, I thought they were the ugliest ornaments that I had ever seen, and I couldn't imagine anybody would want to hang these heavy things on their Christmas tree. So I promptly sold them at my garage sale. And when the man gave me $3 a piece, I thought, hey, that's pretty good. But then, about 2 months later, Bill and I went over to the Old Threshers reunion, and he bought me a book for my birthday. And on the way home, I opened the book right to the page where the kugels were listed, and they told me that the kugels were the first ornaments ever made, and that they were worth $60 a piece. So I felt very badly that I had sold mine, but I was very fortunate. I went to a sale and bought a lot of Christmas things, and when I picked up the boxes, out rolled a kugel. So I did get one, and I doubt if I'll ever get another one, but I do have one to add to my collection. In 1871, a New York glassmaker produced the first American-made silvered glass balls and chains of beads. Now, when ornaments were first made, they weren't silvered. They were just very dull, and they were just painted on the outside. But later, they began silvering the inside of the ornament and then painting them, and that's how you get the nice, shiny ornament. Some of the first ornaments made were out of wax. Here I have a wax angel. And spun glass was another. In Germany, they made what they called chromolithographs, and they were pictures of angels or Santa Clauses, and then they made these ornaments. Most ornaments were made by families. For instance, the glass balls would be blown, and then a family would receive several of them, and they would paint them and silver them and decorate them. And the same with these. They would get all the different parts, and they would put them together, and then they would sell them. And that was what we would call a cottage industry, where the family, each member of the family, even the little children, had a job to do when it came to making the ornaments. At first, Christmas trees were natural Christmas trees. And people just went out and cut their Christmas trees. And most people could not afford to have a tree of their own. Here in the United States, the first Christmas trees would have been set up in community halls or in churches, and they were set up for the children. Later, as the custom grew, people began cutting trees, and then it became an industry. There was a man in New York that decided, up in the Adirondacks, he thought, well, I think I can sell these trees. So he cut a bunch of the trees, and he and his boys brought them out of the mountains by ox carts. He put them on steamboats and brought them down the Hudson River to New York. And those were some of the first Christmas trees that were sold at Washington Market. And since then, it's, over the years, become quite an industry. The conservationists got very excited because suddenly they were cutting all these trees down and not replacing them. So President Teddy Roosevelt was one of the first that would not allow Christmas tree in his house, in the White House for Christmas. But you may know and had heard the story that his young son had one and hid it in the closet and had his own Christmas tree. And when he told his father about it, his father was very upset with him. But for years after, this little boy always had a Christmas tree in his closet. So eventually, artificial trees were developed. Now, at first, a tree would have been a pyramid. They would take made a pyramid out of wood, covered it with greens, and then attached candles and presents to it. In the Ladies' Home Journal, let's see, where did I put that? Well, in the Ladies' Home Journal, it said in 1900, December issue, said to take a stepladder, cover it with greens, and put candles and put the presents on the steps if you couldn't afford a Christmas tree. So then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Germany began making feather trees. And this is a feather tree. Now what they did is they took goose feathers, they cut them in half, slid them down the middle, and then they dyed them. Now this is a dyed goose feather. So they would take a wire and wrap these goose feathers around the wire. And you can see as that goes around, it gives you the look of needles on a pine tree. And that's the way these feather trees were made. These goose feathers were wrapped very closely all around the wire, and when they got to the end of the wire, they attached them to a wood dowel that was set in a wood square or a round piece of wood. And then they covered that all with brown paper to give it the effect of a tree trunk. And this is an old feather tree. It's in very bad condition, this one is. And you can see if you take these pieces off that actually these are goose feathers. But they get a little brittle eventually. And now these are being made today again. Some people have want to buy a feather tree. They've gotten very expensive. A small feather tree like this would cost you a couple $100 because there's so many people collecting them. So people figured out how to make them, and there are some people that are making these feather trees and selling the new feather trees. And really, the new ones are nice because they're not so, the wires get loose and old after a while. And the new feather trees are really nice and strong. So these feather trees came from Germany. And when World War I came along, it interrupted the flow of these feather trees coming into Germany. And during that time, they were produced in the United States. But after the war, they began, did I say World War I? I'm Anna. World War I. And after the war, they began being made in Germany. The Americans didn't like making them very well, so they decided it was better to let the Germans make them and buy them. And in the early 30s, you could buy them in blue, white, gold, dark green, and light green. Now, the widely spaced branches of a feather tree, you may look at this and say, well, that doesn't look like a Christmas tree. But these trees are copied after the fir trees that grow in the Black Forest in Germany. And they lend themselves very well to displaying your ornaments because you can certainly see your ornaments very well. Now, you've heard the phrase, sugar plums dance through their heads. And sugar plums was one of the things that they put on the tree. And to make sugar plums, you took a green gauge plum and boiled it in a heavy syrup of sugar and cornstarch until it got real kind of translucent. And then you took that plum and tied it on your tree by the stem. Now, when these trees were decorated in the early days, as I said, the trees were decorated with the candles. The children were let into the room, but the candles were very dangerous because in these homes there was a lot of decoration. As I said, there were tablecloths and drapes and carpets and the furniture. So it was really very dangerous to have a lit tree, but with live candles. So the trees did not stay lit very long. Anyone that remembers having a tree in their home There was always water sitting close by in case there was an accident. And these trees were not didn't stay lit very long. In the early days, the children's toys were attached to the tree. Now, the toys were not all that big in those days, so that the dolls were small, say something like this. Some of my ornaments on my tree are original, some are reproductions. Little dolls like this could be tied on the branches, little toys for the children. And all. Now the children could have the toys, and either of the parent handed out the toys, or every toy had a name on them, so the children didn't take somebody else's toy. You just didn't run to the tree and take what you wanted. But you weren't allowed to eat the sweetmeats and things that were hanging on the tree. All the candies and everything were not allowed to be eaten until the 12th night. So, said one special pleasure afforded by those old-fashioned edible tree decorations has been lost for us today. The tantalizing treats were forbidden and not to be eaten until the 12th night. Therefore, the dismantling of the tree, so disappointing to today's children, was an exciting, anticipated, and delicious climax to the Christmas season. Now, I wanted to show you some of these ornaments here. When the ornaments were first blown from glass, they were free blown. They didn't use molds. And you can see on some of these old ornaments that they're not perfect. A lot of them that are crooked, and they're very fine glass. This ornament has a hole in it, and holes will come in your ornament even if you don't bump them, because the glass is so thin and so fragile it just kind of disappears. The ornaments of today are much thicker glass. Then someone came along and invented molds, and they were able to blow the glass rods into a mold and get all kind of shapes. Now here's another ornament. It's an unsilvered ornament. Fruits were very popular. In the old days, they hung real fruits on the tree, so naturally many of the ornaments were copied after what was used on the first trees. They used a lot of spun glass. I only have one of these. I wish I had more of them, but they're very hard to find. If you have some of these, you're very lucky. This is spun glass. It's the same spun glass that's in the bird tails. And there's a chromolithograph of an angel on both sides of these. You could buy these chromolithographs in sheets, and you could cut out what you wanted to use and make Christmas ornaments. Sometimes they decorated them with tinsel. Now the birds on the tree, if your bird clip opens to the back, you have a very old bird. The new birds open to the front. So that's how you can tell sometimes if you have an old bird or a new one. And ornaments were made out of cotton, and they're very detailed sometimes. This little girl here with her skates, she's made with cotton, and she has crepe paper here for her little collar on her dress. But this is actually a Ubik doll head on this little one, and she comes from Germany. And this ornament here, I like these ornaments that are in several different pieces, like this. These are called fantasies. Now when you put the candles on the tree, if you'll notice here, you have trouble keeping these candles straight. On some of these candle clips on the bottom, there's a little piece of metal that clips open, and you can hang a weight on there to keep your, what we call a counterbalance. Here's one with you could hang a counterbalance on there. You could be like a wire with a ball on the bottom, and then you could balance your candle so it wouldn't fall off the tree. At first the candles were just a long soft taper that was actually wired right onto the tree. Then you know how inventive people are. They keep coming up with a better idea. So they came up with these little candle clips. Then they thought about the counterbalances. At one time they had little globes, little glass globes that sat on clips, and your candles were down inside those globes. Those were very pretty. Now I put under the tree some of the toys that the children might get for Christmas. There were always dolls and bears, and a Noah's Ark was a good Christmas treat, a Christmas present, and blocks. Now in 1846, the tradition of Christmas cards began. John Callcott Horsley designed a card at the suggestion of Henry Cole, director of the Victorian Albert Museum. The exchange of Christmas cards was given a tremendous impetus in the 1870s because of a lithographer from Germany named Louis Prang. Prang set in motion the American card printing industry by mass-producing Christmas cards at his Tewksbury, Massachusetts shop. He worked on zinc plates, using 8 to 20 plates to produce a card. He shunned mechanical and joke cards, as well as lace and bow trim cards, because he felt these were in poor taste. Now we have a nice album over there that I hope you'll take a minute to look at before you leave. These belong to Jean Lutke, who collects postcards, and there's several lovely Christmas postcards in there from years back. Now, I would want to know if any of you had any questions or would like to make any comments about today's program.
Say again about the head on this little doll. What did
Well,
you say that is?
Anybody that collects dolls has heard of the Ubich, H-E-U-B-A-C-H, Ubich Doll Company in Germany. They make dolls, China dolls, and these little heads on here are made by that company. So I know that some of you collect Christmas ornaments. It's gotten to be quite a hobby over the years. Oh, this one here. Now, some people, when they used to make the cookies years ago, sometimes they would make just a flat cookie and cut it out, and then they would buy the lithographs, which would come in Santa Clauses, snowmen, all kind of shapes, and glue them onto that cookie with egg white after they baked it, or maybe some frosting, they'd put it on there. And then they would put a hole in their tree. Now, I don't have any cookies. I just have this one here that is a piece of an old ornament that's made out of clay, and it just has some decorations on it for a cookie. And those have also would be eaten by the children. Some people do have those old cookies that are very, very old that they found up in people's attics that are still in good shape. So.
Tell us about the head, little
This one, okay,
there.
yeah. And this is a doll's head blown in a mold and has glass eyes. Now, unfortunately, she's lost one of her eyes, but you can replace that by getting a bead in that size and then putting it in that socket and painting the pupil on it, which I haven't gotten around to doing yet, so. And these ornaments like this, these usually came from Czechoslovakia. The people in Czechoslovakia did more with the beading. And then Japan got into that market too after a while with the little beads. Oh, and I wanted to show you this. Before, you know, we had these lovely hooks we hang things on the tree with. Well, you didn't have those years ago. You just got a little wire like this, and then you bent it however you want. And that's how you hung your ornaments on the tree. You can buy these wires. There's a lot of replacements being made today, catalogs that you can order things from that you can use on your tree. Now here's another ornament. This is called a wire-wrapped ornament. And it's unsilvered, and then it's wrapped with fine wire all around. It has a little lithograph, chromolithograph, right, glued to the front.
To store that tree, do those branches fold up?
Yes, they'll all fold flat. And then I just leave these little lights on. I take the candles off and I leave the lights on. I put the lights on to give an effect of having the little candles because I can't light the candles. But here's a nice little ornament that looks like a lamp. These were quite popular. And most of these then were blown in molds. When we went to the Christmas convention, last year. We had a glass blower from Germany, and he showed us how they do the blowing, how they blow the glass rods into the mold. But it's just amazing how fast they can do it. And they gave some people the opportunity just to blow a round ball. And it was kind of funny to watch because some of them would get really odd-shaped balls because, you know, they make it look so easy when they do it. But when you have to do it yourself, it's quite a bit different.
What about this little red bird?
Oh, that's an owl. Isn't he funny? You wouldn't see a red owl, would you? Now, if you got your Santa Clauses would have long coats on it like they did years ago. So if you've got an old ornament, he's got to have a long coat on. The newer Santa Clauses have a short coat on with their pants. So that this red bird over here, he's really supposed to be an owl, but he doesn't look much like one, does he? Now this one, we bought this red thing at a convention. And I had some of these, so I put that on there and got a new tail for him and then made my own ornaments. So see, some of them are remade and refurbished. And if you just can buy that part, you can get it pretty cheaply, and then you can make it yourself and have a nice ornament.
Is a star old?
What?
Is a star old?
This up on the top of the tree, yes.
Shows the old.
Does the tradition of stringing popcorn go back?
Right.
Victorian?
And they used to string popcorn and cranberries and berries that they found out in the woods. And now this is a cotton Santa Claus. He's all made with cotton, and he has a little plaster face on him. Now he's very old.
Died teddy bear.
No. No, I don't own any stuff. I think this is a very well-loved teddy bear, but he doesn't belong to me. He does now. I'm trying to take good care of him, but he is not a stiff. Okay, well, I think I'll just bring my program to a close then, and you can just all wander around and look at what you'd like to come up and look at the tree. And may all your Christmases be as sublime as the one Mahala Roach of Mississippi recorded in her December the 28th or 25th, 1885 diary entry. We had a magnificent dinner, and my husband declared my pudding was perfect. This is the 12th Christmas since we were married, and I believe each has been happier than the last. This has been a busy but very happy year. Thank God. Oh, this Santa Claus up there, he's a reaper.